If you don't know our theme this year, the phrase for our theme, I'm sure by the end of these 10 days you're going to know it by heart. In a place where no one's acting human, strive to be human. It seems like a pretty straightforward phrase, but tonight I want to show you a couple of approaches to this theme from Pirkei Avot, with the hopes that you might relate to one of them and be able to use it as you go through the next 10 days together. And I figured out it's minimum 8 hours of us in this room, praying, singing, thinking, reflecting. Now, for me, our theme this year, and actually for all the years that we've been doing these themes, is like a giant kavanah. It's like a direction of thought, a direction of our hearts. It's like a liturgy and poetry filter, a way to think about the whole endeavor of the High Holy Days through a distinctive lens that we've set up from the very beginning. But the problem is that each of us comes into this room from such different perspectives, and we go out of this room after this introspective process with different areas that we need to work on for our lives. So, hence, I wanted to give you several different ways to approach this text, and then hopefully, over the High Holy Days, it'll give you different ways to think about your own lives as you go through this liturgy. So the first approach is the way that we've introduced the text through our translation. In a place when no one is acting human, strive to be human. Morals, be moral. Someone put it more bluntly to me. He said, when people are morons, be a mensch. This way of thinking about it leads us to action. It leads us towards social justice. Standing up for the rights of others that can't stand up for themselves. It's about turning injustice into justice, inhumaneness into humaneness, from being inhuman to being human. This is how we translated it. This was a big part of our online High Holy Day message. Feed the hungry, care for the elderly, attend public rallies, be human. Now, there may be many people in this room tonight who are unsure how you want to react to the actions of certain people and places that have happened in our recent history. You're affected by Charlottesville and racism and sexism, for that matter, any ism, by discrimination and intolerance and hate and genocide and the subversion of the rights of those who cannot help themselves. But you're not quite positive how or where you want to participate. So perhaps these next 10 days can be a reflection on what really matters to you and where you want to make a difference in the world. That is our opportunity, and that is our challenge. By the way, bringing food for the hungry, like those bags we have, and bringing diapers for refugees, that's a perfect way to start. So now the second approach. The second approach, I have to point out the Hebrew wording in our theme, because in our translation we say, in a place where no one's acting human, strive to be human. And it certainly is a valid translation / interpretation. And by the way, any translation is going to be an interpretation. But the actual words in Hebrew, she'ein anashim, which you see actually on the front of the booklets that we have here for you, it means where there are no people. Actually, it means where there are no men, but we are in the year 2017, so let's take the gender out of it. Where there are no people. Hishtadel lihiot ish means strive to be a person or a man. So if we use the similar wordings to the translation that we brought to the table, it could be, quote, in a place where there are no humans, strive to be human. So consider how Hillel, who is the person who said this phrase 2,000 years ago, became the head of the Sanhedrin, which is the court in Jerusalem made up of the 21 most influential scholars and leaders of the time. It is said that Hillel only agreed to become the head of the Sanhedrin when he realized that there was no one more qualified to answer questions about Jewish law pertaining to the Pesach offering. It was only when he realized no one else can stand up that he accepted the role as the leader. For him, perhaps the phrase meant, in a place where there are no people to lead, take it upon yourself to be the leader. Or, in a place where there is a vacuum, fill that vacuum. I think reading it this way offers an opportunity to search through our lives, to identify those places where we feel we can step up. Those places where we feel we can fill some kind of void that we feel is missing. Now, it also could mean that we need to become a leader even if we're reluctant to do so, like Hillel was reluctant to do so. And this void, this thing that's missing, it could be anywhere in your lives. It could be at work. It could be in extracurricular activities. It could be in the volunteer work that you do. It could be in this synagogue. It could be in your family, your little nuclear family, or it could be in the greater extended family. Sometimes it's difficult to even think about and identify where there might be something lacking that you feel you can fill. And it's also difficult to take the reins of leadership, to say, I'm going to do something about this. Because we're all a little bit, some of us more than others, afraid to fail. And there are times where it's extremely intimidating to be thrust into the role of being a leader. We may feel we're not worthy. But to summon the courage and to open ourselves up and to put ourselves out there, to become more, that is our opportunity. That is our challenge. Third idea focuses on really the first line, first part of this phrase as opposed to the second part. In a place where there are no people, in a place where there are no humans, in a place where there are no one. If we take this line literally, it could mean there's no one around. And we're left with a basic question. Who are we when no one is there to see us? What do we act like when there are no other people? According to our text, we still must, even if no one's around, we still must strive to be human. Even if no one is looking, even if there isn't a soul around us, it doesn't mean that we can just throw all morals aside. I call it the Eddie Haskell syndrome, if you remember Leave It to Beaver. Pinchas of Koretz wrote the following, quote, "A person can act as purely innocent, yet be involved in all sorts of devilish schemes. Or he can pose as the most humble of all men while pride rages inside of him. The Torah stresses that in both cases, God, as it were, tests you. And while you may be able to fool others, you cannot fool God. Isn't this a lot like the liturgy that we read on the High Holy Days, right? There's this book. Everything you've done over the last year is in this book. Nothing escapes the view of heaven. And whether there's anyone around or not, we're asking ourselves to meet some kind of standard. It's like there's this Jewish folktale of a man who goes out and takes his little daughter out into a field to steal corn from the neighbor. And he tells his daughter, "You be the lookout." So he's taking it. All of a sudden, his daughter says, "Dad, look to the north. Someone sees you." Looks to the north, doesn't see anyone, kind of gives her a look, goes back to taking the corn. A minute later, "Dad, there's someone in the south who sees you." He's like looking to the south, doesn't see anyone. Now he's starting to get a little perturbed and a little paranoid. Just gives her a look. A minute later, "Dad, there's somebody." He's like, "Hold it. You keep telling me to look around. I look around, I don't see anybody." And she looks up at him, doe eyes, and she says, "But Daddy, God sees you." Now, that might not be your theology, that God is seeing us or looking at us, but it does beg the question, are we the same when we feel like someone sees? Like looking to the south, doesn't see anyone. Now he's starting to get a little perturbed and a little paranoid. Just gives her a look. A minute later, "Dad, there's somebody." He's like, "Hold it. You keep telling me to look around. I look around, I don't see anybody." And she looks up at him, doe eyes, and she says, "But Daddy, God sees you." Now, that might not be your theology, that God is seeing us or looking at us, but it does beg the question, are we the same when we feel like someone sees us or someone's judging us? Or do we act differently if we think we're being seen? Perhaps for some of us, we need to reflect on whether we are who we are at all times, when we were in public around others and when we're at home. And the opportunity and the challenge is to align both our public outer selves and our private inner selves. The last concept, I believe this last idea kind of ties them all together. It is the word hishtadel. B'makom she'en anashim, in a place where there are no people, in a place where there are no humans. Hishtadel lihiot ish. Hishtadel, to be a person, to be a man, to be a human. This word hishtadel, now I'm going to get a little rabbi-y on you. I like the translation that we're using. We use the word strive for that word hishtadel because I believe it encompasses the root of the word. Every Hebrew word has three-lettered roots. There are some exceptions. And the three-lettered root here is shadal. And there's two understandings of it I think are really relevant to us and we can use throughout these 10 days together. The first one is in its simplest form, shadal means to swing open, to open up, like a door. I like to think of it as two doors opening, right? Like a rib cage kind of coming open so that our heart can be seen. And then in a more aggressive form, it's the idea of persuading. That you persuade someone to do something is shidel. But the curious part of this is the form of the word, because the form of this word is reflexive. So it's not that you're doing this to somebody else. You're doing it from inside of yourself. It is hishtadel, is you're opening yourself up. or you're persuading yourself, or you're convincing yourself to act in a certain way. Now, I don't think this is going to be very easy. I think it's difficult to convince or persuade yourself sometimes to stand up for justice or injustice. I think it's hard to take on leadership, even when you know that someone needs to be a leader, and it could be you. And it's not always easy to be the same person when no one's looking as it is to be when someone is looking. We need to open ourselves up to possibilities. We need to persuade ourselves, to convince ourselves to do what we need to do. That's why it's strive. To strive towards something is to exert yourself. It's to make an effort. It's to convince yourself to contend in opposition to something. It is an effort towards a goal. Striving is a process. It's not a destination. And we may never be able to accomplish any of the things that we try to do over the next 10 days. We may not be able to solve an injustice completely. We may not become that leader, and we may not achieve parity in our private and our public selves this week or this month or this year or ever. But we can strive to get there. We can churn up our insides so that we can open ourselves up and we can convince ourselves to do something that we may not either want to do or never thought we could do. We can strive to get there. We can point the arrow in the right direction. And that only comes from inside. It doesn't come from any other person. It doesn't come from your closest people, and it doesn't come from strangers. To strive in a hishtadel sense is opening yourself up to the possibilities of making things happen. It's convincing yourself to actually act, to persuade yourself to be human, completely independent of other people. This is the work we have in store for us over the next 10 days. May we all find what we strive for, a place to combat injustice, a place to become a leader that we need to be and where we need to be it, a place that we can be proud of our public and our private selves. May we find that place and open ourselves up and convince ourselves and persuade ourselves to be that person that we discover right here in this room that we want to be. This is our opportunity, and this is our challenge. Shana Tova.